Now at 11, in less than 24 hours, the Seattle City Council expected to vote on their controversial plan to defund the Seattle Police Department.
The clock is ticking tonight, and that plan gaining momentum over the weekend as protesters from both sides of the issue gathered near City Hall, urging the City Council to listen. But legal experts we spoke to recently believe the City Council will move forward with that plan. KOMO's Kara Kostanich joins us live with what to expect tomorrow and what other hot-button issues are on the agenda. Kara?
That's right, guys, and what we know is that policing in Seattle is up for a drastic change. These are neighbors from across the city that today gathered outside City Hall defending Seattle's police.
I want the public to know that there are many people from communities of color and disenfranchised communities that support law enforcement.
In just hours away, a critical city council vote that could drastically change policing across the city. Seattle Police Officers Guild President Mike Solon.
Everybody's safety is at risk.
The council wants to make deep cuts to SPD's budget, including laying off 100 officers, while the chief and her leadership team would take salary cuts. Also on the chopping block, the navigation team who works with Seattle's homeless.
It is time for change.
Last week, council members did not advance a proposed 50% cut to SPD's remaining budget. But the council's budget committee voted on a series of amendments that included cuts to the SWAT team, Harbor Patrol, Mounted Police, and other departments of the agency. On Thursday, Chief Carmen Best fired back at the council's cuts.
What is the plan?
The chief emphasizing the agency can't operate through proposals.
I've seen great ideas, untested theory, great approaches, but what's the plan? How is it in reality going to work out?
Tomorrow will be filled with debate as the council goes through more amendments and takes a final vote on what members say is their first step towards defunding Seattle Police. And Mayor Jenny Durkan released a statement to us in just the last hour that says, in part, it was unusual for council not to consult with Chief Best on proposed budget amendments that have operational impacts on SPD. Not only does the city charter vest her with management responsibilities for the department, it also mandates that the city maintain adequate police coverage in every part of the city. Her role as chief and her nearly 30 years of experience seem disregarded by the council. Now, the mayor also says she believes they can find common ground in the vision that she and Chief Best have put forward, and as well as the vision that the council supports as well. We're live in Seattle tonight. I'm Kara Kostanich, KOMO News.
Kara, thank you. And the discord continues even in this, the 11th hour. Now, ahead of the critical vote, hundreds rallied to defend Seattle police today. Take a look right here. The police union led that charge and rallied on the steps of City Hall. And on the right side of your screen, this is a group of counter-protesters. They showed up too, and they pushed for defending SPD's budget by 50% for the remainder of the year. Today's protests remained peaceful.
Cars on 4th Avenue separated those rallies, but we only saw minor clashes. A sizable crowd stood outside City Hall. They were holding signs in support of Seattle police.
I want the public to know that there are many people from communities of color and disenfranchised communities that support law enforcement.
The Back the Blue rally was filled with signs reading "Protect our police" and "True to the Blue." They criticized the city council's proposal to cut funding to SPD. The Seattle Police Officers Guild also started a petition on change.org. That petition now has more than 20,000 signatures. Within the last hour, the police union tweeted out this picture thanking supporters at today's rally, adding, quote, "Seattle City Council, are you listening?"
Across the street, people showed up to reiterate their demands to defund the police department. Those protesters want to see the money invested in programs that support Black and brown communities.
This isn't saying abolish the police altogether. This is saying put the funds in the organizations that actually decrease the crime that we have here. If you increase education, housing, and welfare in these neighborhoods, we won't have crime.
While protesters call defunding the police department an opportunity for Seattle, the police chief does continue to express frustration and is critical of cutting the force. In an open letter to the community, she said the department hears the community and knows SPD needs to do better. So here's a closer look at what you should expect tomorrow. At 10 a.m., the Council's Select Budget Committee will meet to either hold or approve the Seattle police budget cuts. If approved, the measure will be presented to the full City Council at 2 p.m. and a potential final vote on the city's SPD's entire revised 2020 budget would come after that.
Because the ignored majority is finally being heard. The unreasonable activism must stop, and the reasonable community is saying no more to this defund nonsense.
Now at 10, protesters show up to defend, not to defund the Seattle Police Department. I'm Vanessa Mishania. Counter-protesters, they weighed in as well ahead of a city council vote tomorrow. Plus, hundreds show up for a concert tonight despite COVID restrictions. You're watching King 5 News. The debate over defunding the Seattle Police Department reached a new peak today when those who backed the department faced those who want to see it dismantled. Pro-police and pro-defunding groups rallied outside of Seattle City Hall today, one day before a city council vote could slash SPD's budget. First, it was the largest group that we've seen come out in support of SPD since protests began in May. Chants of Blue Lives Matter and Back the Blue could be heard from the crowd. The president of the Seattle Police Guild was there, too. He says there is an unreasonable fringe majority on the city council that does not reflect feelings of most of the people in the city.
Tomorrow's vote, they're being influenced to vote no because the ignored majority is finally being heard. The unreasonable activism must stop, and the reasonable community is saying no more to this defund nonsense because it's got everybody's public safety in jeopardy.
Though the crowd in support of officers was larger today, those in favor of defunding were there too. There are some instances where protesters and counter-protesters clashed, but tensions did calm eventually. Some of the counter-protesters were not interested in speaking with our reporters there and tried to block our cameras, but one young woman told us why she showed up today at City Hall.
It's a personal issue for me because the people they're killing look like me, and it could happen to me any day. It could happen to my family.
Seattle City Council members will vote on police department funding tomorrow. It's not the 50% cut that protesters want, but if the vote does go forward, SPD will see significant budget cuts. So how did we get to this point? Well, nationwide, protests against police use of force were sparked by the death of George Floyd. He's the black man who was killed by a Minneapolis police officer back in May. Video of his death fueled riots across the country, including right here in Seattle. A peaceful demonstration turned into a riot downtown at the end of May when SPD cruisers were lit on fire. The beginning of June, we started to see protest after protest. Most of it was concentrated on the Capitol Hill neighborhood. That's where protesters clashed with police at the East Precinct. Police then pulled out of that precinct and the organized protest zone was created. This is when most of the negotiations between the city and protesters began to take shape.
Tomorrow afternoon, Seattle City Council will decide if they will strip a big chunk of the police department's budget. But today, SPD is getting a show of support. Cairo 7's Deborah Horn shows us the large crowds, including a handful of counter-protesters.
Just a handful of counter-protesters were here, and they were mostly relegated to the west side of 4th Avenue. But I have to tell you, this plaza here was filled with lots of people, hundreds of them, in full support of Seattle police. As protests go here in the Emerald City, this was an unusual sight.
Now more than ever, friends, family, neighbors are coming together.
Hundreds of people from across the Puget Sound, indeed across the political spectrum, gathered in support of Seattle police. Why did you come?
Well, first of all, I'm a patriot of this country. I'm a Marine, and I believe that our rights are being trampled on here in Seattle, and the responsibility for our mayor and our governor absolutely is intolerable.
I am an African-American woman, and some of the other people down here at the rally, I don't have the same thought or agenda as them. I just want to defend our chief and our black law enforcement. I don't want to have an all-white police department, and that's what we're going to get.
And defunding the police is not the answer. We need proper reform. Defunding is not it.
There were a few counter-protesters just across 4th Avenue, and there were some tense moments with SPD officers standing guard. But when we tried to talk to them, they blocked our camera with umbrellas and refused. But plenty of others were talking.
We've got to tell and send a message to this crazy Seattle City Council of ours that they are out of their freaking minds to think about defunding.
Including former Seattle Supersonic and perennial political candidate James Donaldson. The president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild says this shows how many people support them and not the city council.
The reasonable community, the ignored majority, who have never been heard here in this city lately due to the unreasonable activism by our elected officials, they needed to be heard.
And Mike Solon says what he saw here makes him believe that the Seattle City Council could be swayed, that they might not go fully with their proposal to slash the police budget. Of course, we'll know soon whether he's right. Reporting in Seattle, Deborah Horn, KIRO 7 News.
Let's take a closer look at some of the proposals the City Council is considering to defund. They include shrinking the department by 100 officers and slashing the chief's salary. School resource officers would also be on the chopping block, but keep in mind, the Seattle School Board has already voted to remove those officers from their schools. If the vote passes tomorrow, the next step will be negotiations between City Council and SPD's union. All new at 11:30, video shows vandalism and damage at a Starbucks in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. We have just placed calls into police to figure out what is happening there. But we did see anti-police graffiti on the floor inside and on the outside of the building. Meanwhile, Seattle City Council is expected to vote on a proposal to slash the police department's budget. That's tomorrow. And ahead of the vote, a crowd gathered outside of City Hall calling for defending rather than defunding police. They were led by Mike Solon, president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild. He says the show of support reflects the tens of thousands who have already signed a petition defending Seattle police. People in the crowd say safety is one of their biggest concerns.
I'm here to support not just the Seattle Police Department, but every police department across this country that's under attack right now. For one thing, I fear for my own safety.
There were some counter-protesters that showed up across from City Hall. Many were dressed in all black, chanting Black Lives Matter, but they declined to talk on camera. Tomorrow, the City Council will take a look at a number of ways they can cut SPD's budget. That includes cutting 100 officers and reducing the chief's salary. A judge has told city leaders they need to remember the consent decree for police reforms that are still in play. Now, upon closer look, it appears some things, such as implicit bias training, would be in violation if the city tried to cut those orders. The budget chair, Teresa Mosqueda, says they will work within those requirements.